The moment you hear the truth, you realize you were never meant to stay. Rain whispered against the tall glass windows as Emily Carter stood frozen in the dim hallway, a silver tray trembling in her hands, the soft hum of distant music fading into nothing as his voice cut through everything, low, calm, final. She was temporary, and just like that, the world shifted without warning, without mercy. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, refusing to move, refusing to exist, because that voice belonged to him. Lucien Voss, the man no one questioned, the man who never repeated himself, the vampire king, and yet she stayed there, hidden just beyond the corner, unseen, unheard, her fingers tightening around the edge of the tray until the metal pressed cold against her skin, as if grounding her in a moment that didn't feel real, that couldn't be real, not after the way he had looked at her just nights ago, not after the quiet silence they had shared that felt heavier than words. But now the silence meant something else, something colder, something sharp enough to cut, and the laughter that followed from the council members inside the room only made it worse, echoing softly like distant thunder, like confirmation that she had misunderstood everything, that she had imagined something where there had been nothing at all, just another human in a room full of immortals, just another passing moment in a life that stretched far beyond hers, temporary. The word repeated itself in her mind, again and again, until it no longer sounded like a word but a verdict, final and unchangeable. Her steps felt weightless as she turned away, careful, silent, disappearing the same way she had learned to survive, unnoticed, unimportant, invisible, the tray still in her hands though she couldn't remember picking it back up, the hallway stretching endlessly in front of her, lights too bright, air too thin, everything too much and not enough at the same time. She didn't stop until she reached the staff restroom, pushing the door open with shaking hands, locking it behind her as if that could keep the world out, as if that could keep the truth from following her inside. The mirror reflected someone she barely recognized, pale, still, eyes too wide, as if she had just woken from something she didn't understand, and for a long moment she just stood there, staring, breathing, trying to steady something that refused to settle, until her hand moved almost on its own, slowly, hesitantly, resting over her stomach, and everything went quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that presses down, heavy, undeniable, because suddenly the word temporary didn't just belong to her, it threatened something else, something far more fragile, far more dangerous, something that couldn't be dismissed so easily. Her fingers curled slightly as if protecting something unseen, her mind racing through every glance, every moment, every unspoken thing she had tried not to name, and now it all felt like a mistake she couldn't undo, a truth she couldn't ignore. The sound of footsteps passing outside the door made her flinch, reality snapping back into place, reminding her where she was, who she was, what she wasn't, and slowly, carefully, she exhaled. The kind of breath that feels like letting go of something you never really had, because in his world, she had never been anything more than a moment, and moments didn't stay, moments didn't matter, but this, whatever this was, it would change everything, whether he knew it or not, whether he cared or not. Emily Carter lowered her gaze, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger, and in that silence, a decision began to form, quiet, steady, irreversible. Because if she was temporary in his world, then she would become something else entirely, something he would never see coming, something he might never find, and somewhere far above the city, behind walls built on power and centuries of control. Lucien Voss continued his conversation without hesitation, unaware that with a single word, he had already lost the one thing he could never replace. The door clicked open and Emily stepped back into the hallway as if nothing had happened. As if the last few minutes had not just rewritten her entire life, her face calm, her steps measured, the same quiet waitress everyone ignored, but inside everything had shifted, every sound sharper, every glance heavier, every second stretching just a little too long. She moved through the ballroom with practiced ease, refilling glasses, collecting empty plates, never once looking toward the raised platform where he stood, because she knew if she did, she would hesitate, and hesitation was something she could not afford anymore, not now, not after understanding exactly where she stood in his world. Temporary, the word echoed again, softer now but deeper, settling into something permanent, something that would not leave, and yet her hand drifted again, subtle, almost unconscious, brushing against her stomach beneath the uniform, a small, grounding motion that no one noticed, no one could notice, because in a room like this, humans were background decoration, easily replaced, easily forgotten, and that was Exactly what she needed to become, invisible enough to disappear completely. The music swelled again, laughter rising, conversations blending into a soft blur as she passed through clusters of elegant figures, their voices smooth, controlled, speaking of alliances, of power, of futures planned decades in advance, and for the first time she realized just how small her life had always been in comparison, how fragile, how easily it could be rewritten by people who did not even see her as part of the story. But that was before tonight, before the quiet realization that she was carrying something that did belong in their world, something that would never be ignored once discovered. Her pulse quickened at the thought, not fear, not exactly, but urgency, a steady, undeniable pull toward something she had never planned for, never imagined. She reached the service corridor and slipped inside, the noise fading instantly, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant clatter of dishes, the air colder here, cleaner, real in a way the ballroom was not. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, allowing herself 1 second, just one, to think clearly, to plan, because she understood now that staying was not an option, not if she wanted control over what came next, not if she wanted to protect something that could not protect itself. Her locker stood at the end of the narrow hallway, dented metal, barely large enough for her few belongings. She opened it quietly, her fingers steady despite everything, pulling out her worn jacket, her small bag, nothing more. She had never owned much, which made leaving easier, faster, cleaner. No ties, no weight holding her back, just a life that could be folded into a single bag and carried away without anyone noticing. She changed quickly, slipping out of the uniform that marked her as part of this place, replacing it with something ordinary, something forgettable. And when she closed the locker for the last time, the sound felt final, louder than it should have been, echoing faintly in the empty corridor. She paused, listening, but no one came, no one cared. Of course they did not. She was temporary, after all. A faint smile touched her lips, not bitter, not angry, just certain, because now that word meant something different, not a limitation, but a freedom, a reason to leave before anyone thought to stop her. She adjusted the strap of her bag and moved toward the exit at the back of the building, the one staff used to slip in and out unnoticed. The door pushed open with a soft creak and the night air rushed in, cool, damp, carrying the scent of rain and city lights. She stepped outside without looking back, the door closing behind her with a quiet click that seemed to erase her from the building entirely, from his world entirely, at least for now. And somewhere far above, beneath chandeliers and whispered politics, Lucien Voss paused mid-sentence, his expression tightening just slightly, almost imperceptible, as if something distant had shifted beyond his reach, something he could not yet name. But for the first time in a very long time, the Vampire King felt the faintest flicker of something unfamiliar, something slipping through his control, and he did not like it. The rain had started again by the time Emily reached the edge of the block, soft at first, then steady, coating the pavement in a reflective sheen that turned every streetlight into something distant and unreal. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, her steps quick but controlled, not running, not yet, because running drew attention and attention was the last thing she needed. Her mind moved faster than her feet, mapping out possibilities, bus stations, late-night routes, places where no one asked questions and no one cared who you were or where you came from. Places where a girl with a small bag and tired eyes could disappear without leaving a trace. She had lived that kind of life before, drifting, surviving, staying just out of reach of anything permanent, and now she would do it again, only this time with purpose, with something worth protecting. Her hand pressed lightly against her stomach once more, the motion instinctive now, grounding her with every step, reminding her that this was no longer just about escape, it was about control, about choosing a future instead of being placed into one. Behind her, the city continued as if nothing had changed, cars passing, voices echoing faintly, the distant hum of life moving forward without noticing her absence. But somewhere deeper, beyond the surface, something had shifted, something she could almost feel, like a thread pulling taut between 2 points that refused to fully break. She ignored it, forced her focus forward. Because whatever connection existed, whatever unseen bond tied her to him, it did not matter anymore, not after what she had heard, not after understanding her place in his world. Temporary things were not meant to stay, and she would not wait to be discarded when she could leave on her own terms. A bus stop came into view ahead, dimly lit, nearly empty, just one flickering overhead light and a bench slick with rain. She slowed slightly, her breathing steadying as she approached, blending into the quiet stillness of the night, checking the route map with a quick glance, calculating distances, timing, Options: the next bus would arrive in 8 minutes, enough time to think, not enough time to hesitate. She sat down, the cold seeping through her clothes, but she did not move, did not react, because discomfort was familiar, manageable, predictable. Unlike everything else that had happened tonight, her gaze drifted across the empty street, watching reflections ripple in the rainwater. Her thoughts quieter now, sharper, more focused. She would take the bus out of the district, then another across state lines if necessary, change names if needed. She had done it before, she could do it again. The difference was that this time she would not look back, she could not afford to. A car passed slowly at the far end of the street, too smooth, too deliberate. Her eyes flicked toward it instinctively before she looked away, forcing herself not to react, not to draw attention, just another person waiting for a ride, nothing more, nothing worth noticing. The seconds stretched, each one heavier than the last, and then, without warning, far above the skyline, in a place she could no longer see, Lucien Voss went completely still, his hand resting against the polished surface of a table as his conversation faded into silence around him, the room shifting subtly, every presence waiting without understanding. Why? Because something had just slipped beyond his reach, something that should not have been able to leave. His eyes darkened, not with anger, not yet, but with something colder, something calculating, as if a piece of a puzzle had gone missing and the absence alone was enough to demand attention. He did not move immediately, did not speak, but the air around him changed, tightening, focusing, and for the first time in years, his control was no longer absolute, because somewhere in the city, just miles away, Emily Carter sat beneath a flickering light, unnoticed, unclaimed, and already slipping beyond the world that had never intended to keep her, while the faint, invisible thread between them stretched thinner, weaker, but not gone, never gone, and neither of them yet understood what would happen when it finally pulled tight again. The bus headlights appeared at the far end of the street, cutting through the rain like a quiet promise, and Emily Carter felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something steadier, something final. 8 minutes had passed and now there was no more time to think, only to act. She stood slowly, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder, her movements calm, deliberate, as if she had done this 100 times before, because in a way she had. Leaving was not new to her, but leaving like this, with something unknown shaping her next step, that was different. The bus rolled closer, tires hissing against wet asphalt, its interior lights glowing warm against the cold night, a normal scene, ordinary, almost forgettable, exactly what she needed. The doors opened with a soft mechanical sigh and she stepped forward without hesitation, dropping a few crumpled bills into the fare box. The driver barely glanced at her, just another late-night passenger, just another face passing through, and for a brief second, that anonymity felt like safety. She moved down the aisle and chose a seat near the back, by the window, where she could watch without being watched. The bus pulled away from the curb, and with it, something inside her loosened, just slightly, as the city began to slide past in blurred streaks of light and shadow. She rested her head lightly against the cool glass, her reflection faint, almost transparent, blending with the darkness outside, and again, her hand found its way to her stomach, slower this time, more certain, as if acknowledging something real, something that was no longer just a possibility but a truth she carried with every breath. She did not speak, did not think in words, but the silence between her thoughts was filled with a quiet determination that had not been there before. She would keep moving, she would not stop until distance became protection, until the world that had never seen her lost her completely, until whatever connection tied her to that place faded into nothing, if it ever could. The bus turned onto a wider road, leaving behind the district of glass towers and hidden power, moving toward quieter neighborhoods, dimmer lights, smaller lives, and for the first time since stepping out into the rain, Emily allowed her shoulders to relax, just a fraction, not enough to lose focus, but enough to breathe, and then, without warning, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, a subtle shift that made her eyes lift instinctively. Scanning the empty seats, the quiet passengers, everything normal, everything unchanged, except for a feeling she could not name, a faint pressure in the air, like something unseen brushing too close. She looked away, dismissing it, forcing herself back into the rhythm of the road, because fear was not useful, not now, not when she had come this far, but miles behind her, high above the city, something very real had already begun to move. Lucien Voss stood alone now, the room long since emptied. At his command, silence stretching around him like a living thing, his expression unreadable, his posture still, but the stillness was not calm, it was focus, sharp and absolute. his fingers tapped once against the surface beside him, a single, controlled motion, and the entire building seemed to respond, subtle shifts, quiet movements, orders passed without words, because when a king noticed something missing, the world did not wait for explanation, it adjusted, it searched, it listened. His gaze lowered slightly, not to anything visible, but inward, toward something he had not felt in centuries, a disruption, small but undeniable, like a thread pulled too far, too fast, something that should have remained within his control now slipping just beyond it, and that alone was enough to demand correction. He did not rush, did not react blindly, because power like his did not chase, it drew things back, inevitably. Inevitably. His voice, when it came, was quiet, measured, but it carried through the empty space with absolute clarity. Find what is missing, and somewhere across the city, systems awakened, networks moved, shadows shifted, while on a quiet bus heading away from everything she had known, Emily Carter sat beneath dim lights, unaware that her absence had already been noticed, that her disappearance was no longer just her own, and that distance, no matter how carefully chosen, might not be enough to keep her hidden from something that had never truly let her go. The bus moved steadily through the night, each mile placing more distance between Emily Carter and the world she had just left behind, but distance did not feel like freedom, not yet. It felt like a fragile illusion, something that could break if she thought too hard about it. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching reflection slide across the glass, streetlights stretching into long golden lines before vanishing into darkness. Her breathing slow, controlled, matching the rhythm of the road, because control was all she had now, control over her choices, over her direction, over the future she was quietly building with every mile. The bus passed a highway sign, indicating they were nearly 15 miles out of the city, and she allowed herself a small exhale, not relief, but acknowledgement. She was doing it, she was leaving, truly leaving, and yet that faint, persistent sensation had not disappeared, it lingered just beneath the surface, like a distant echo she could not quite hear but could not ignore. She shifted slightly in her seat, her hand pressing more firmly against her stomach as if grounding herself against something unseen, something that pulsed quietly, steadily, reminding her that she was not alone in this decision, not anymore. The overhead lights dimmed automatically as the bus entered a darker stretch of highway, the interior growing softer, quieter, most passengers lost in their own silence. Heads lowered, eyes closed, disconnected from everything around them, and for a moment, Emily almost believed she could become like that too, just another traveler passing through, unremarkable, untraceable. But then the bus slowed slightly, not enough to stop, just enough to shift her awareness, her eyes lifting again, scanning the road ahead. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place, and still, something felt different, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a change in pressure. Before a storm, she glanced toward the front of the bus, the driver's posture unchanged, steady, focused, everything normal, everything exactly as it should be, and yet her instincts refused to settle. They sharpened instead, quiet but insistent, urging her not to relax, not to assume safety too soon, because safety had never been something she could rely on, not in her world, not in his. Miles away, in a place where time moved differently, Lucien Voss stood before a wall of screens, each one displaying fragments of the city, traffic cameras, transit feeds, quiet corners where movement could be tracked and patterns could be broken down. His presence alone shifted the room, drawing every detail into focus, every inconsistency into clarity. He did not move quickly, did not speak unnecessarily, his attention precise, deliberate, because he was not searching blindly, he was observing, calculating, understanding what had changed and why. The absence he felt was no longer vague, it had direction now, distance, movement. Something had left and it was continuing to leave, and that alone narrowed everything. His gaze paused on one screen, a late-night bus crossing the outer edge of the city grid, its route predictable, its passengers irrelevant, and yet something about it held his attention just a fraction longer than necessary. Not certainty, not recognition, just a quiet alignment of instinct and logic. His fingers tapped once against the console, and the screen expanded, sharpening, focusing. While on that same bus, Emily shifted again, her breath catching just slightly as the faint pressure in the air returned, stronger this time, not overwhelming, but undeniable, like being watched without seeing the eyes. She turned her head slowly, scanning the empty seats behind her, the dim aisle, the quiet stillness of strangers lost in their own thoughts. Nothing there, nothing visible, and yet the feeling remained, tightening just enough to make her pulse quicken. She looked forward again, forcing herself to stay calm, to stay still, because panic would only make her visible, and visibility was something she could not afford, not now, not when she had come this far. The bus continued forward, cutting through the darkness, carrying her further away with every passing second, but somewhere between the miles and the silence, the distance she depended on was already beginning to close, not in speed, not in pursuit, but in awareness, and awareness, once awakened, was far more dangerous than anything chasing her from behind. The bus cut through the empty highway like a quiet line drawn across darkness, steady, uninterrupted, but inside Emily Carter nothing felt steady anymore. The pressure had not faded, it had grown, subtle at first, now undeniable, like a presence just beyond reach, not touching, not seen, but close enough to change the air around her. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to turn again, refusing to confirm what she could not see, because confirmation would make it real, and if it was real, then distance meant nothing. Her fingers curled slightly against her palm before easing again, slow, controlled. She could not afford panic, not now, not when every choice mattered. The bus passed another sign, 30 miles out, the city now far behind, reduced to nothing but a memory and a direction, and still the feeling remained, threading through her thoughts, tightening just enough to remind her that leaving had not severed everything, only changed the distance between 2 points that were never meant to drift apart. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself, forcing logic into the space where instinct threatened to take over. There were explanations, there had to be, exhaustion, stress, the weight of everything happening at once, her mind searching for patterns where none existed. That was all it had to be, because the alternative meant something far more dangerous, something she was not ready to face. The bus lights flickered again, softer this time, almost unnoticeable, but she saw it, felt it, her eyes lifting just slightly, scanning the reflection in the glass, her own face staring back, pale, composed, almost distant, as if she were already becoming someone else, someone who did not belong to the life she had left behind, someone who could disappear completely, if given enough time, if given enough distance. But time and distance were no longer entirely hers to control. Miles away, Lucien Voss did not move from where he stood, his attention locked onto the screen before him, the expanded feed now clearer, sharper, every detail unfolding in silent precision, passengers shifting, lights dimming, reflections distorting the view just enough to obscure certainty, but not enough to erase instinct. His gaze narrowed slightly, not in frustration, but in recognition, because what he felt was no longer an absence alone. It was a direction, a pull, faint but consistent, like something slipping through his grasp but leaving behind a trace too distinct to ignore. His hand rested lightly against the surface beside him, still, composed, yet the air around him carried a different weight now, something sharper, something focused, because once awareness took form, it did not retreat, it advanced, quietly, inevitably. He did not issue commands immediately, did not rush to act, because he understood something others did not. This was not a chase, not yet. This was alignment, the narrowing of distance through understanding rather than speed, and that made it far more precise, far more certain. Back on the bus, Emily shifted again, the sensation cresting just beneath her awareness, stronger now, closer, as if whatever it was had begun to notice her noticing it. Her breath caught for half a second before she forced it steady again, her hand pressing more firmly against her stomach, grounding, anchoring, reminding her why she could not falter, why she could not stop, because this was no longer just about leaving, it was about staying ahead of something she did not fully understand. The bus slowed slightly as it approached a junction, preparing to merge onto another route, and in that moment of reduced speed, the silence inside the vehicle deepened, stretching, holding, as if the world itself had paused just long enough for something unseen to draw closer. Her eyes lifted again, scanning without turning, feeling without confirming, and for the first time since stepping onto the bus, a single thought settled clearly in her mind, not fear, not panic, but realization. She was not as hidden as she needed to be, not yet, and somewhere beyond the miles, beyond the rain-soaked roads and quiet highways, the distance she relied on was already beginning to collapse, not through force, not through pursuit, but through something far more inevitable, something that did not need to move faster, only needed to know where to look. The bus merged onto a quieter road, the hum of the engine deepening as the city lights disappeared completely behind them, leaving only long stretches of darkness broken by occasional roadside lamps, and Emily Carter felt it then, not as a thought, not as a fear, but as a certainty settling into her bones. The distance she had been counting on was no longer enough. She did not move immediately, did not react outwardly, but inside something shifted, sharper now, more focused, because running without direction was no longer a plan, it was a delay, and delay would only give whatever was behind her more time to close in. Her eyes moved slowly across the bus interior, not searching for danger, but measuring options, exits, timing, the next stop, the driver's pattern, the rhythm of the road. Everything mattered now. Every detail a piece of a decision she had not yet fully formed, the pressure in the air pulsed again, faint but closer, like a signal growing stronger, and her hand pressed instinctively against her stomach, grounding, steadying, reminding her why hesitation was no longer allowed. She needed to change direction, not just physically, but strategically, disappear deeper, faster. Before awareness became certainty, the bus sign above flickered, announcing the next stop in 3 miles, a small town exit, barely marked. The kind of place most passengers ignored, which made it exactly what she needed. Her breathing slowed, aligning with the plan forming in her mind. She would get off there, not because it was safe, but because it was unpredictable, and unpredictability was her only advantage now. She shifted slightly in her seat, preparing without drawing attention, every movement small, controlled, deliberate. While miles away, Lucien Voss remained still, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer passive observation. It was precision narrowing to a point. The feed before him continued to move, frames passing in quiet succession, but his focus had already moved beyond the surface, beyond what could be seen, because what he followed was not just an image, it was a pattern, a deviation, a presence that should not exist outside his reach and yet did. His gaze lowered slightly, not to the screen, but to something deeper, something that had begun to respond to distance in a way he had not expected. The connection was faint, unstable, but real, and that alone changed everything, because once something could be felt, it could be found. He did not speak, did not issue a command, but those around him felt it, the shift, the silent directive that required no words, and systems adjusted accordingly, routes mapped, probabilities calculated, movement anticipated, not chasing, not yet, but preparing, aligning with something inevitable. Back on the bus, the overhead speaker crackled softly, announcing the upcoming stop, and Emily rose before the sound fully faded, her bag already in her hand, her expression neutral, her pace unhurried. Just another passenger stepping off early, nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering. The bus slowed, tires pressing against gravel as it pulled to the side of the road. The door opened with a soft hiss, and cool night air rushed in again, different now, quieter, heavier with the scent of trees and damp earth instead of concrete and steel. She stepped down without looking back, her shoes meeting the ground with a soft, steady sound, and the bus pulled away almost immediately, its lights disappearing into the distance within seconds, leaving her alone beneath a flickering sign and a stretch of empty road that led into darkness. She stood still for a moment, listening, not for footsteps, not for movement, but for that feeling, that pressure that had followed her this far, and it was still there, faint but present, like a thread that refused to snap no matter how far she moved. Her jaw tightened slightly, not in fear but in understanding. Distance alone would not break it. She needed something else, something deeper, something that could disrupt whatever unseen link still connected her to a world she had already left behind. She adjusted her grip on the bag and turned away from the road, stepping into the darker path leading toward the small town ahead, her pace steady, her focus sharp, because this was no longer just escape, it was strategy. And somewhere far beyond the quiet stretch of road, Lucien Voss finally moved, just one step forward, deliberate, controlled, as if the direction had already been chosen long before the path became visible. And though miles still separated them, the space between awareness and certainty was closing faster than either of them could see. The road into the town stretched ahead in silence, narrow and dimly lit, lined with aging buildings that seemed to lean slightly toward the street as if listening. And Emily Carter walked without slowing, her footsteps steady against the damp pavement, her breathing controlled, every sense sharpened beyond comfort, because the moment she stepped off that bus, something had changed again. The pressure had not followed her in the same way, it had shifted, not closer, not farther, but different, as if whatever had been tracking her was adjusting, recalibrating, learning. And that thought settled cold in her chest, because it meant she was not just being followed, she was being understood. She turned down a side street without hesitation, choosing direction not by familiarity but by instinct, avoiding open spaces, avoiding direct lines, moving through the town in angles and shadows, her mind mapping exits, cover, distance. She needed time, even a few hours, enough to disappear deeper, enough to break any pattern that could be traced back to her. A flickering sign ahead cast weak light over a small roadside motel. the kind travelers barely noticed, which made it useful. She slowed just enough to take it in. 2 floors, external doors, minimal activity, one dim office light still on. It was not safe, but nowhere was, and stopping here would buy her something more valuable than safety, unpredictability. She stepped inside the office, the bell above the door chiming softly. The man behind the counter barely looked up, handing over a key after a brief exchange. No questions, no curiosity, just routine, and within minutes she was inside a small, quiet room that smelled faintly of old fabric and cleaning solution. She locked the door immediately, then again, checking it twice before stepping back, her shoulders lowering slightly as the outside world faded into muffled silence. For the first time since leaving, she allowed herself to stop moving, just for a moment, just long enough to think clearly. Her bag rested on the edge of the bed, untouched, because what mattered now was not what she carried, but what she needed to understand. She moved slowly toward the mirror, her reflection staring back at her under dim yellow light, still composed, still controlled, but there was something else now, something beneath the surface, something she had not noticed before. Her hand lifted again, resting over her stomach, and this time she did not pull it away. She stayed there, still, listening, not with her ears, but with something deeper, something quieter, and for a brief second, the world seemed to narrow, the room fading into the background as a faint warmth spread beneath her palm, subtle, almost imagined, but real enough to make her breath pause. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in realization, because whatever connection she had been trying to escape, whatever thread still tied her to him, it was not one-sided, it was not just something he could feel, it existed here too, within her, within what she carried, and that changed everything. Because distance could not break something that existed on both ends. Her hand lowered slowly, her thoughts shifting rapidly, recalculating, adjusting, because running alone would not be enough. She needed to understand what she was dealing with, needed to find a way to hide something that could not simply be hidden by miles or movement. Outside, the town remained quiet, unaware, untouched by the shift unfolding within. A single room, but miles away, Lucien Voss stood before the same screen, the image frozen now, no longer needed, because what he followed had moved beyond sight entirely, his gaze unfocused slightly, directed inward, toward the same faint connection that had just awakened on the other side, and for the first time, there was no ambiguity, no uncertainty, just a clear, undeniable pull that pointed in a direction that no system could map, no network could track, because it was not data, it was something far older, far more precise. His expression did not change, but the stillness around him sharpened, focused, because now he did not need to search, he only needed to follow, and somewhere in a quiet motel room, standing alone beneath dim light, Emily Carter realized the same truth at the exact same moment, that whatever linked them was no longer fading, it was growing, and distance, no matter how carefully chosen, was no longer enough to keep them apart. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls had moved, but because the space between Emily Carter and the truth had disappeared completely. She stood still for a long moment after that realization settled, her hand no longer resting against her stomach but hovering slightly, as if unsure whether to hold on or let go, because holding on meant accepting something she could not outrun, and letting go was no longer an option. Her breath came slower, deeper, each inhale measured, each exhale controlled, not out of calm, but out of necessity, because control was the only thing keeping everything from unraveling too quickly. She turned away from the mirror and moved toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look outside. The town remained quiet, almost untouched, a few scattered lights, empty streets, nothing that hinted at the shift taking place beneath its surface, nothing that suggested that somewhere within this stillness, something ancient and precise had just found direction. She let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away, her mind moving faster now. Not in panic, but in clarity, because understanding changed everything. Running had bought her time, but time alone would not solve this. She needed distance, yes, but she also needed disruption, something that could interfere with whatever invisible connection existed, something unpredictable enough to break the pattern forming between them. Her gaze moved across the room, searching, thinking, recalculating. She could not stay here long, not anymore. This place had already served its purpose, and staying would only make her easier to find. She reached for her bag, unzipping it quickly, checking what little she had, essentials only, nothing unnecessary, nothing that would slow her down. Her movements faster now, more decisive, because hesitation had no place left in her choices. Outside, the faint sound of a car passing on the distant road barely registered, the world continuing as if nothing had changed, but everything had, and she could feel it in the way the air pressed slightly heavier against her skin, in the way the silence no longer felt empty, but occupied by something unseen, something aware. Miles away, Lucien Voss stood at the edge of that same awareness, no longer searching, no longer calculating probabilities, because the uncertainty had ended. What remained was direction, clear and undeniable. His gaze lifted slightly, not toward any screen, not toward any map, but toward something only he could perceive, the connection now stronger, more defined, no longer a faint thread, but something closer to a line being drawn steadily across distance, and once a line existed, it could be followed. His expression remained composed, controlled, but beneath that control was something sharper, something that had not been present before, not urgency, not impatience, but inevitability, because whatever had slipped beyond his reach had not truly escaped, it had only moved, and movement always left a path. Back in the small motel room, Emily slung her bag over her shoulder and moved toward the door, her hand pausing just before the handle, her breath steadying one last time, because she understood now that every step forward was no longer just about staying ahead, it was about staying unpredictable, about becoming something that could not be easily tracked, even by something that did not rely on sight or sound. She opened the door slowly, stepping back into the quiet night, the air cooler now, sharper, carrying the faint scent of rain that had not yet fallen. She did not look back, did not hesitate, her path already chosen before her foot touched the ground, and yet, as she moved away from the motel, deeper into the sleeping town, that feeling followed, not distant anymore, not fading, but present, steady, as if the space between them had begun to collapse in ways distance could not prevent, and far beyond the empty roads and silent buildings, Lucien Voss finally took another step forward, not toward a place, but toward a certainty, because he no longer needed to ask where she had gone, only how long it would take before the path between them closed completely, and in that quiet convergence of movement and awareness, one truth settled between them, unspoken but absolute, that no matter how far she ran, no matter how carefully she planned, the moment he reached her would not be an accident. It would be inevitable, and this time, neither of them would be able to pretend it was temporary.